You asked me how we started as a firm, and I think it's an interesting story. The three of us met. Morris and Childs and Richard Bergman met at MIT because they were students there. I had gone to Penn. I'd worked in Philadelphia. I came to Boston. I worked at Sasaki's, and Morris Childs was working at Sasaki, so he and I met. The year before, Morris and Richard were teaching at the BAC, running the first year program. And it happens that Richard decided to go to Berkeley for one more year as a graduate student. So he left that year, and when I came to Sasaki's in the summer of '65, Morris Childs said, hey, would you like to, we got quite friendly, would you like to co-chair the first year design studio at BAC? And I said, absolutely. So we started working together all that year. Richard came back in June of '66, and I met him in June of '66. So the three of us got together, and all three of us really were interested in starting our own practice. We really were. We were earnestly interested in that. And let me tell you one of the reasons, and I know young architects think that things are tough, but when we were young architects didn't treat young architects very well. They really did not treat very well. I mean, the pay was atrocious. You didn't have any benefits, anything. You had 2 weeks vacation, that's it, and 4 days off a year. And there was just no benefits. So we determined we were going to start a practice. So we entered a competition. There's a huge competition in Birmingham, Alabama for an art center. And we knew that it'd be difficult to win, but we all had jobs because we all had young children, babies. And we had in the evenings and weekends, we worked together solving this problem. And we came up with a pretty good solution. But what we found was that we worked together very, very well. And that was the real key to our starting our practice. At the end, we submitted the thing, and we did not win. But we realized how simpatico we were to each other. And then we said a little bit more seriously, let's start. So we got 2 jobs. One is a art gallery on Newbury Street, which Richard was instrumental in getting, and the other was a Greek Orthodox church in Ipswich, Mass., which I was instrumental because of my last name. However, and we thought, we got it. We had a job, a small church, but the 3 of us, and all of us then left our regular jobs, and we were committed. And then we went through schematic design.
I came to Boston, started at GSD. Within a few weeks, I was working at Arthur Brooks 5 days a week for the mornings. For the 4 years I was at GSD. And then upon graduation, well, it actually happened a little before I graduated, I was offered a job if I would come and work with them, and it was Marcus & Noka doing hospitals. And that was a result of a hospital design I did at GSD, and they happened to see the drawings of 3 students, and they cornered me 3 months before I graduated.
How did that turn into Payette?
Very easy. I just went to town, and they rather liked it. And in 5 years, they were older men, and it was a small office of about, when I got there, there were maybe 6 or 8 in the architectural area. They did have an engineering group. We gathered a small crew together, and it became in 65 Payette, Marcus Noka, and I was made president, and from there on, they retired probably 70. One retired in 69, one retired more or less in 69, was in the office for a few years after that.
And where do you see Payette headed in the future?
Up.
The firm began with Tim Anderson some years ago. He was joined a few years later by George Notter. I had started my own practice concurrently and was joined by another to form a partnership. The odd thing about that was that we were all classmates from GSD in the same year. So there was a certain blood brotherhood. When Tim and George formed their partnership, that was about the time that Jim came. to join them, and he'll speak more about that. I joined the firm in 1975, and the firm became Anderson, Naughton, Feingold, and through various other sequences, it became Feingold, Alexander and Associates. I think the firm, is known and is remembered as the firm which started the adaptive use movement in the greater Boston area, and was one of which spread throughout the greater New England and eventually the rest of the country, as many other architects picked up on the idea that there was new life in older structures, and many exciting projects. It led, of course, to works in historic preservation as well, and we continue not only to adapt and restore and revitalize, but design wonderful new buildings as well.
Terrific. Jim?
That is a good summary of the history. When I arrived in 1969 from Philadelphia, it was an exciting time because the whole preservation reuse movement was just getting started. Of course, one of the great fears that I had as being part of that was that, oh, that's not creative. I'm not going to be creative. I'm going to lose what I trained to be an architect, which is doing new buildings. I quickly found in projects like Old City Hall in Boston how one has to be creative to reuse and make significant an older building. So that history just kept going, and we proceeded to do much more of that sort of work and then branch out into new buildings in very sensitive urban areas. So we did have a chance to do lots of new structures as well. So that history continued. We were fortunate enough to be part of the team that restored Ellis Island as one of the highlights of our career, and locally the Hatch Shell and other Boston landmarks over the years. And I agree, I think what Mo is saying is true. That movement will continue. It keeps going. We also do new buildings whenever we can. So we like both.
So the last question is to just ask both of you to reflect for a moment on where Feingold Alexander is headed in the future, since we're here today focused on the history.
Well, we're at it's an interesting question you ask. We have many new shareholders who are advancing in the ownership of the firm, who are impassioned about our legacy and want to see it survive. And so they are developing their skills in adaptive use and preservation and generally design. And as Jim points out, they are really challenging projects. I mean, they are not new buildings in a green field. It takes a great skill, great attention to detail, and lots of experience, which is why, of course, a lot of people come to us and stay. We have not spawned a lot of other firms. There are several, of course, but not a lot. People come and stay because of the excitement of what we're doing. And we hope that, and we're pleased that those new shareholders share in that wish to continue the legacy established over 50 years ago.
Jim?
Yes. I think that transition and making a transition in ownership and leadership is really one of the challenges and one of the goals of the firm, and one of the exciting things that we're facing as we see the new owners move up through the firm. Technology also becomes a big part of that as we think of what's going to be the next thing, the next technology. Keeping on top of all of that has changed our practice so immensely. But it doesn't really change the sort of hands-on quality of what we have to bring to design and what we bring to our buildings. I think what we haven't mentioned is we also do a lot of work in the area of religious buildings, particularly synagogues, which is a very interesting sidelight that's developed, all of which happen to be brand new buildings and not reuse. But we see this in the area of growth for the future for us as well.
Came to town in '67 after Penn, and I went to work with Hugh Stubbins for a month, and then we had a fight, and then I worked for him for another month, and we both decided it was better if I left because it was his office. And by then, the position I really wanted at Cambridge 7 had opened up, and I was employee number 4, which was wonderful to be there. What a great place that was. I went to New York for a number of years and came back to Cambridge 7, and at that point, Terry Rankin, who was then president of the BSA, said, "Todd, you should become the chief of the Urban Design Committee, which has become a bunch of people who just sort of talk to each other. And it's time for the BSA to get out into the world." So using the vehicle of the Urban Design Committee, we started to make public pronouncements on new projects, on what the BRA was doing, on what the mayor thought was good design. And the press loved it because it was frequently controversial. And as a result, the BSA began to get slots on different commissions, on different committees. The paper would call up and ask for our opinion about something that was in the public light. Chamber of Commerce and the Urban Design Committee did a plan for the development of downtown Boston when the BRA had no planning director. And there was a lot of surrogate work in that period, in the early 80s, during the 80s, when Boston was really hopping, and the city didn't quite have a hand on the development process or on anybody setting any standards for what good design was. And the committee was wonderful. We had 30 or 40 people who would show up on Saturday mornings and work and draw stuff and give it to the Globe, and they'd print it, and it was a very energetic time. It was wonderful, and and we got to write commentaries that got read into the public record, and I think we really helped establish a tone of design in this city and urban design. So that was a good experience.
I came to Cambridge 7 after going to New York in 1965, interviewing with top 6 firms in the city, SOM, Pay, Grusin, etc. No one was hired. I took the train up to Boston, interviewed with another 6 or 7 firms, and got 6 offers out of 7 interviews. Everyone was hired. So what I learned is timing is very important and what's going on in the city. And this was really largely driven by the redevelopment activity in Boston. Everyone had a lot of work to do. And Cambridge 7 for me was the most interesting firm. They were doing unusual projects, an aquarium, an expo, and guidelines for the transportation center, which is where I spent my first 2 years, underground, exploring Boston and working on the transportation guidelines. It's fabulous. What is Cambridge 7 doing today? We've evolved. We're 50 years old. We're solely owned by new shareholders, so it's a new people steering the ship. Although I think the commitment to integrating all aspects of design, urban design, planning, architecture, graphic design, interior design, exhibit design, into one project is still a strong mission of the firm to accomplish. And we're still doing that. Technology has come forth to allow many exciting and interesting things to do. Global communication requires you to be able to respond in minutes rather than in 2 weeks. Everything has changed from that standpoint, but I think the focus of doing architecture that impacts the public at large is still very much in the mission and vision of our firm.
My first job, which is in my life legendary because it was such luck that I didn't deserve. I was a modernist. I was just born a modernist. I just knew it. I featured modern literature in my courses at Vassar, and I didn't take art because I didn't believe in it, but I was a modern dancer, and I knew a great deal about the theater and dance in Vassar. And I spent one summer at the Museum of Modern Art because they had a theater and dance department. miraculously through Alfred Barr. And I loved the place, had a mentor that let me into all the secret corners and the special showings and all of that. And I said, I'm going to be back here, and this is where I'm going to work. And as soon as I graduated from college, I was not going home. I got on a bus and I went down to New York to interview and get a job. But it was a moment when, after having lived through the war years, thinking that women were going to get those jobs at time in life and other glamorous places that the men had left behind, they all came back and took the jobs. So by 47, which this was, there were no more jobs that weren't being filled by veterans, most returning. I had prepared myself for the fact that I was going to be a secretary. That was, you could be a teacher or secretary. That was really the choice after a good master education. And so I went to Poughkeepsie, found someone and studied shorthand all my senior year. So I was ready for this, and I went down and applied to the personnel office, and Herb Kaplan gave me a test, and yes, I could take shorthand, and that's really how it was being done in those days. We didn't have computers. And so you were in the secretarial pool, swimming merrily wherever anybody wanted a letter. So within about a day or two, he came to me and he said, there's a gentleman down the hall who would like you to take a letter. Let's go down there and turn left. His name is Johnson. So Mr. Johnson will see you. And I went down and I met Mr. Johnson, who was Philip Johnson, newly returned to this job, very newly. It was just at the crest of 47, and he'd been in bad, I was in bad order, but in bad company for some years, and I think he talked his way back into the museum, and he took over the architecture department. I didn't know much about architecture. I had one friend in college who knew about it. Her name is Phyllis Bronfman, by the way. We were the only two people who could even pronounce architecture in this whole class. To this day, it's true. So Philip liked my letter, and then he said, come on into the department, and I came into the department, and I was there. You know, that was the end of it. Somebody gave me a salary that was so small that they couldn't even miss it. I mean, it was really coal miner's wages. But what an opportunity. There's this beautiful office looking out on the garden. It's in the new Goodwin building, of course. And everybody gets to have a painting over their desk. What would you like? I have a Broadway Boogie Woogie from Mondrian. And somebody else has something else. And they come from the collection and they move around and they change the pictures over your desk. And they talk a lot. And Mary Barnes was the curator, Edward Larry Barnes' wife. And he was then in private practice. Betty Mock, who was an art historian, and her husband was an architect in Princeton. She was writing the book about modern bridges and my art, particularly. A. Louise Huxtable had just been hired by Philip out of the New York University historic group. She was a totally different breed of person, but she became my immediate supervisor, friend, and guide through what this place was all about. And then Peter Blake joined shortly after that. He'd come off the Architecture magazine. And it was like that. And next door was the design department, Edgar Kaufman, who was, a mysterious character, but by God, I got to know Edgar Kaufman and Greta Daniels and the collection, the design side of it, as well as the architecture side. Philip was, the important part of 1947 was, Philip was mounting the first Mies exhibition in America. And it was a big deal. I mean, I thought all exhibitions were like this, but this was excessive because everybody from the school, may still have been Armour, I'm not quite sure, or IIT was there. People from Mies's office, all of his partners, his friends, his lady friends. And, you know, they were just there, they were actually building stuff on site, or details of walls and so on that they were putting into the exhibition. So we had a lot of Mies company. And at the time, I didn't understand the politics of Philip Mies, Gropius, Bauhaus, or any of that. I do today, and what I know that is that he was making a king of Mies, and this is what he did. He wrote the book, he did the exhibit, and he got every architect in America to think that this is the future person as well as, you know, idea. And so from there on, it just, you know, wonderful things happened. I was in the department on and off over 4 years.